In Fight Club, the character of narrator, played by Edward Norton, and the character of Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt, are the same person. It's just that at the beginning of the movie, Edward Norton doesn't know it. He thinks Tyler is a whole other person, and only at the end does he learn the truth.
Say it. Because we're the same person. That's right.
And this is exactly like how advanced and professional screenwriters understand the relationship between story and storytelling and the screenplay, except backward. It doesn't matter if you're starting out on your screenwriting journey or if you've been at it a few years. You know, the difference between where you're more than likely at and between master screenwriters is this: knowing the difference between story and storytelling. The master screenwriters are like Edward Norton at the end of the movie. They already know the truth. They know these two people are actually the same person. They know that to have a functional screenplay, you must not only have a functional story and have told it well, you have to know the difference between what is story and what is storytelling. Or in Fight Club terms, you have to know the difference between Tyler Durden and narrator and what makes each of them tick, because only then can you know what parts of them you need to bring to bear on the screenplay that you're writing, which is a combination of those two parts.
Without pain, without sacrifice, we would have nothing.
Knowing this is not the only thing that lets you cross over into mastery. There's a host of other stuff to know, but this is a required gate to pass through, and you really have two options to go through this gate. Option one, learn the difference between story and storytelling as you go.
It'll hurt more than you've ever been burned, and you will have a scar.
What are you doing? Guided meditation worked for cancer. It could work for this.
Stay with the pain. Don't shut this out.
So you practice and practice and practice, and eventually it clicks for you. Whether you can name all the parts of story or not doesn't matter. In fact, most professional screenwriters who did the learn as you go approach can't identify or even name the parts of story or the tools of storytelling if you were to ask them point blank. Why? Because they spent so much time practicing that they instinctively know which is which. They know what is a story and what is storytelling when they're looking at a screenplay. It's just natural to them. In other words, they went to Fight Club and fought and fought and fought, and now they are different people because of that experience.
Even if I could tell someone they had a good fight, I wouldn't be talking to the same man. Who you were in Fight Club is not who you were in the rest of the world.
They can't necessarily explain it, but they know they are now completely different people because they put out the effort. And this is option one. Practice enough, struggle enough, fight enough that you will eventually get there. Or option two, you intentionally study the pieces of story and the methods of storytelling. You learn them, you figure them out, you practice using them individually. And as you begin to learn them, then you begin to integrate them into your writing. In fighting terms, this is the person who, instead of going to Fight Club, goes to a gym, finds a trainer, and practices specific techniques. They're not going out and getting in fights in some underground club to learn the craft. They have laser focus, they hone, they drill down. So Rocky Balboa isn't hanging out with Tyler Durden to learn how to fight. And the main difference between these two options, option one, where you just show up to Fight Club over and over and over and eventually get good at fighting, where you eventually understand the difference between story and storytelling, that one takes about 10 times as long as the one where you intentionally study the elements of story and the elements of storytelling. Or in real numbers, option one, doing it on your own, the Fight Club approach, will take you about 10 years. Option two, maybe 1 year. Maybe. But both options will get you there, and whichever option you choose, if you want to find success as a screenwriter, you must be able to differentiate and discern the difference between story and storytelling, between Tyler Durden and the narrator. When I taught screenwriting and filmmaking at university, and even now, if you engage in any formal training with me to move forward in screenwriting mastery, the difference between story and storytelling is always the very first lesson, or even the first several lessons. It's so important and so critical, and anyone who wants to be a master of the craft must know it. Okay, Jake, so what is the difference? And I'm just gonna scratch the surface here. I mean, this is literally the tip of the iceberg. It might even be the tippity top of the tip of the iceberg. Let's start with story. The story itself, the plot, characters, conflict, themes, setting, the thing about someone who wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't, those pieces are related to the story itself. Story is the narrative elements only. Will Benjamin Gates find the fabled treasure? Will Maximus return Rome to the people? Will Judy Hopps figure out what is making the predators go feral? Will Jack Travern save the people on the bus? Will John McClane rescue his wife from Hans Gruber? Will the narrator stop Tyler Durden's plans of sabotage? All of those are the stories, but in order to write the screenplays, the screenwriters all did two things. I mean, first, they figured out the story itself. All the pieces that make a story a story. They planned it. Some writers planned a lot, some planned a little, but all of them knew they had a solid story before they started. So for example, they knew what Tyler Durden was planning to do and the steps he was going to take to accomplish this goal, the story. And the second thing is, those screenwriters figured out how they were going to tell that story. And you can tell stories in a host of ways. The core parts of the story, those remain the same, but you can make a story funny or scary or serious or just plain a fun adventure. You've got lots of options. And so you figure out who the narrator is and how that story is going to be told. So what you're doing as a screenwriter, or any storyteller really, I mean, we're talking mainly about screenwriting, but this applies to any storytelling medium, is not just figuring out the story itself, but you're also figuring out the best way to tell that story. Silence of the Lambs is a great film, but it could have been done as a comedy. Now, it wouldn't have been as good, but you could have done it. So the story must work. That is 100% true. Tyler Durden must have a plan, but the way you tell the story matters just as much. And the narrator has to tell that story in a way that emotionally connects to the audience. And the master screenwriter is going to take their knowledge of Tyler Durden and their knowledge of narrator and combine them into one thing, the screenplay. But you know what a lot of novice and intermediate screenwriters do? They don't plan. I'll just figure it out as I go. They merely come up with an idea for a story, usually an idea that's not very good, not very marketable, or both of those, and they just start writing. And then they wonder why their screenplays aren't any good, or why they aren't placing in contests or getting favorable feedback if someone happens to request their script. And the reason is that screenwriter has not yet discerned the difference between story and storytelling. It's like Fight Club. Okay, you know Tyler Durden and the narrator are the same person, but they are also two distinct parts of the same person. And novice writers are all like, well, I've written a screenplay, of course I have story and storytelling in it. And that's because they're just thinking that story and storytelling are incidental to the writing of the screenplay. But they are not. Only when you combine both of them effectively do they make up a single screenplay, because a screenplay includes both the narrator and Tyler Durden. But non-advanced and master writers don't realize this, and so they just start writing a screenplay. And once you put words into screenplay format, now they're storytelling. But they haven't even figured out the story yet, and so they're trying to figure out the story and the storytelling at the same time. They're writing like it's the end of Fight Club, and they're not paying attention that there are two distinct parts: Tyler Durden, story, and narrator, the storytelling, that each needs some focused attention. And this is why it takes so long to learn the craft of screenwriting on your own. You're making it harder on yourself because you're trying to do two things at once, and you don't even realize that you need to be doing two distinct things. But you think, oh, but Jake, I know how to write, and screenplay format is fairly easy to learn, and plus, I know what stories are, so I know what storytelling is, I know what stories are, I can just start writing. Well, okay there, Skippy, let's try this first. Which of these is a chair? Now, I'm guessing you chose this one, so nicely done. Well, what about this group? Which is the chair? Again, nicely done. Now, which of these is not a chair? Excellent. So you know what a chair is and what a chair isn't. Yes, and I think we can assume we're all good here, which is great. Okay, now go build a chair. Could you? Could you really? Well, okay, maybe, but probably not unless you have some experience building things. You know what a chair is, but that doesn't mean you can build one. But then let me push a little, because do you really know what a chair is? Can you define a chair? Because you know that this is a chair and this isn't, But what's the difference? And why is this a chair and this is also a chair, but they don't look anything alike? Or do they? I mean, what makes a chair a chair? And if you're a regular person in the market to buy a chair, you know what you're looking for. You know what a chair is. You even know what a good chair is and what a bad chair is. You can pick them out. You've spent a lifetime sitting in and seeing chairs of all shapes and sizes. Your intuitive sense of what a good chair is or is not has been fine-tuned over time. You inherently know it, but can you define it? How is this chair different from this stool? Both have 4 legs, a seat, a back. Why is one a chair and the other a stool? Well, one is taller. Okay, well, what about now? Is this a kid's chair or is it just a stool? And someone who is a master craftsman of chairs could tell you it has a seat and a back, and for the intended user of the chair, they only need to bend knees and waist and sit down. There is room for only one person. If you have to step up, not a chair. If more than one person can sit on it, not a chair. That's a love seat or a couch. And when it comes to us as screenwriters, we have to know what makes a story a story. We have to know all the parts, all the dimensions, so that we know we have a story and not a love seat. And then we have to determine the best way to package that story for the intended audience. Should it be a thick cushion, maybe just made of wood, or leather? Maybe it's hot pink. So we have to construct the story so it's actually a story. Tyler Durden is Tyler Durden. And then we have to package it in a way that our intended audience is going to emotionally respond to it. We have to give them a narrator, a way into the story, giving us both story and storytelling. So to be clear, story has to do with what takes place within the narrative. Storytelling has to do with how the audience experiences that story. And you as a screenwriter have to know you have both. And if your story is working but you aren't telling it effectively, the audience isn't going to care about the story. If your storytelling is working but your story is broken, the audience is going to poke holes in everything and they might be entertained, but they're not going to like it. The only way you can find success as a screenwriter is to make sure you have both the story and the storytelling working together. And if you don't know which part is broken because you don't know the difference between the two, you're never going to be able to fix your screenplay. And that would be a very sad thing because you have stories to tell. You have stories to tell that will change someone's life when they experience it. It will give them hope when they have none. It will give them courage when they're lacking. It will challenge them to do better. It will shed light on something that needs to be fixed, perhaps that they can fix. And they will never be inspired or courageous or challenged if you can't discern the difference between story and storytelling. And maybe you want to take forever to learn. That's cool. You want to just do it on your own. You want to go to a weekly fight club and fight and fight and fight so you can get incrementally better each time. Go for it. But if you don't want to take forever, you're going to have to go to the gym and learn the difference between story and storytelling, between the narrative and the methods you use to engage an audience with that narrative. And there's a lot of tools and pieces to both of those, but if you're serious about learning the craft of storytelling and story and screenwriting, you should consider joining the Screenwriting Fast Track. And you want to guess what the entire first module is all about? Yeah, story and storytelling. And I don't just scratch the tippity top of the tip of the iceberg. We pull it apart so you can learn it more quickly. And it's the entire first module because it's that important. I want to help you become a master screenwriter. And if you want my help beyond the weekly videos that I post about screenwriting, be sure to check out the links in the description below, especially the Screenwriting Fast Track. And if you're like, Jake, I'm just here for the free YouTube vids and I'll do it on my own, that's totally fine. Just write in the comments, Fight Club for me. And whatever option you choose, you can always drop a question below in the comments if you have one, or merely watch through other videos that I have to find the answers to your questions. Maybe like this one. If you found value here, please don't forget about all the fun buttons below. And when you decide to tell a story that matters. See you later.